So, in our last episode, we continued our series on the foundation of philosophical thought. We picked up where we left off, and we continued with Aristotle and worked our way up to Marx. And that's where we're kind of establishing our first debate is going to be on the topic of Marxism, and that will be done next week. So to pick up where we last left off, we left off with Marx. Um, and the next important philosophical figure will be he's kind of divisive. I wouldn't say as divisive as Marx, but still divisive. Friedrich Nietzsche. Excuse me. Friedrich Nietzsche lived from 1844 to 1900 AD. He is known for his rather radical critique of traditional values, and particularly that of Christianity and morality. And he's well known for his concept of will to power, right? uh, Nietzsche's work would end up having a profound influence on existentialism, postmodernism, and 20th century philosophy. So going back to the will to power, Nietzsche believed that the fundamental driving force behind all human behavior is this quote unquote will to power. This desire to exert control, mastery, and creativity over oneself and the world. He completely rejected the idea that humans are driven primarily by a desire for pleasure, as we saw Epicurus suggested, or rationality, as Kant believed. He instead argued that power and self overcoming are essential to human nature. So this part is interesting because all of these depend on how you look at humanity, right? So Epicurus, I would think that he would see humanity as not like they're inherently bad or evil, but we're inherently born in suffering. So to be the ultimate human would be to experience the ultimate pleasure. With Kant, it's rationale above all, being educated, and that's what's going to make you better and having a rational mind. With Nietzsche, it's realist, right? Because think about what time he's living in, 1844 to 1900. Europe just got out of the Napoleonic Wars. The US in about 20 years time is going to be uh from when he was born, was going to be going through civil war, and then 1900 is just before World War 1. So there's a lot of violence, a lot of political unrest in the world. So this definitely kind of molded his ideals, right? And so that whole idea of power and self overcoming, being essential human nature, is definitely prominent, coming from his experiences as a human, right? Especially when you look at the nature of the world at the time was a lot of empires, right? And so empires are trying to assert their power and control over everything, whether it's the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the British Empire, Japanese Empire. Like there was a lot of empires, right? And empires were like they were on the dying end at this time, right? So they were trying to hold on to power as much as they could. Got anything to add, Marshall?
Um, Not a whole lot. I do kind of tend to resonate with the idea that people are mostly driven by power. Um, See that a lot in just society, that a lot of people in positions of power are there because they want more power or something like that.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. It's never the very few people these days, at least in the modern day, as we see, uh, go to positions of power ready to relinquish it when their time has come, right? Um, look at, for example, Putin, right? We know that Putin is a dictator, that he rigs elections, that he's trying to maintain power as much as possible in Russia, right? Same for Kim Jong Un in North Korea, right? Like I think that's like one of the more weaker points in the Marxist philosophy is that in the process to becoming a communist society, a truly communist society, quote unquote, you have the dictatorship of the proletariat. The problem is every time communism, Marxism is tried, they get stuck at that stage because the power is corruptive. So whoever gets into power, while they may have good intentions at first, eventually they go, man, I really like having all this money. I like having all this power. I don't want to give this up. And that is why communism and Marxism, uh, that's one of the big weaknesses of it. That's why it's never gotten to the final stage where you have a true communist society, because true communism ends at the dictatorship. And that's just a little snippet of what's to come next week. Uh, so to continue, Nietzsche famously critiqued traditional Christian morality, right? He saw Christian morality as promoting weakness, passivity, and resentment, and he would call this slave morality. He believed that Christianity and its emphasis on humility and self sacrifice stifled human potential. Instead, he would advocate for the reevaluation of all values, where individuals create their own moral frameworks based on strength, creativity, and vitality. He called this master morality. So I think that's interesting. If you look at religions of the world and their rules, viewing it as like a slave morality, and particularly Christian theology and teachings, because it definitely is like one of the big things. Is turn the other cheek. Christ said to turn the other cheek when you're insulted and stuff like that. Um, and so I can understand where one might look at this and go, that's weakness. That's you should strike back, especially if it's a very serious insult, or like say someone insults your wife, your family. Like I can understand wanting to strike back. But I think this really goes to the point of moral relativism, which is I think I would believe a dangerous place to be at, right? Because if you truly believe in moral relativism, then that means no one is inherently right and no one is inherently wrong. Because if everyone has their own set of moral values, then you could have someone going around playing vigilante like Batman, killing criminals left and right, regardless of what they're doing. They could be jaywalking, they could be robbing an ATM, they could be rapists, murderers, right? Some of them would be good, right? Like, I'd be fine with someone killing rapists, someone killing murderers, and putting a stop to it. But is it it's when it becomes excessive, where it's like, okay, like maybe you shouldn't be killing everybody that commits a crime, because some crimes aren't worth the penalty of death, right? Like, but in their philosophy, in their mind, if we lived under Nietzschean values, um, you would be, oh, this is my moral framework. You can't criticize me based off it because it's my moral views different from yours, and you have your own moral views. So I think that's the weakness of it. Like I can understand, coming up with your own moral framework outside of religion, right? Like I have my own moral framework outside of religion, but I still have my religious views and my religious morality still, right? I just know that when I'm dealing with people outside of religion, I'm like, okay, here's my values and here's my morals when it comes to that. They're influenced by my religion, but it's not like, oh, I'm quoting the Bible to justify my morality.
Yeah, the my issue with that would be the just really subjective nature of, I mean, it is completely right how we think of the values. I think you put it accurately. It's not really great to have something like that, because what somebody might be able to see as, a good thing doesn't necessarily match another, and that issue is a problem. And I think one of the comments that was like especially weird was the idea that like um humility stifles like innovation, and I don't think that has to be the case. I think that seeking humility to like a very great extent, that I feel like it's like almost assuming that everybody who's humble is like a monk that like um won't leave, like a castle or something, and just focuses on religious studies and whatever. But I don't think it's exactly like the best way of looking at it as a whole. You can still be humble and still strive for, improving something.
I completely agree. And even looking at it from like, oh, he's looking at Christian Monk's point of view, that's still wrong because we had many scientific discoveries that were from Catholic monks, Catholic brothers. Uh, what's his name? Mendel, the guy who tested genes and stuff using flowers, like trading pollen and all that between flowers. He was a monk,
Yeah.
right? And so to say that to be humble and to self-sacrifice stifles human potential, if anything it allows human potential to grow because you see the goodness of others and you see and you're putting humanity before yourself,
Yeah,
right? And so if anything I think it's even better for humanity and its potential.
I agree.
Yeah. So this is going to be one of his major theories. A lot of people will remember this if they learned anything about World War II. The Übermensch or Overman. In his book "In Thus Spoke Zarathustra," Nietzsche introduced the concept of the Übermensch or the Overman. Excuse me. This is an ideal human who transcends conventional morality and creates their own values. The Übermensch represents a new stage of human development, one that affirms life and its challenges rather than seeking comfort or solace in religious or moral absolutes. So I'll be honest, this kind of reminds me of you probably won't understand what I'm talking about, but the God Emperor of Mankind from Warhammer 40k. This I think would be like the obvious for those people that out there that know the lore of the Emperor. This would be an obvious example of the Übermensch. So those of you who don't know, the God Emperor of Mankind in Warhammer 40k is this larger than life figure who, in the 30,000th millennium, he comes and not the 30,000th millennium, it was the 30th millennium. Uh, sorry, comes and unites all the broken human tribes, and he's doing away with religion. He's doing away with pretty much all world religions. He does not want he thinks religions weaken humanity when they should be focusing on scientific discovery and all that stuff. Trust in science over religion. And this would end up backfiring on him when he is mortally wounded and is entombed in the Golden Throne. This is in the Warhammer lore, and basically he becomes the God Emperor of mankind. Humans all over the universe would see him as their new god, and it kind of goes against this guy's whole teaching. But yeah, and so I think a lot of people misunderstand the Übermensch because it's not talking about a specific race of people. It's not talking about a specific type of man. It's talking about a set of moral values that is separate from religious and moral absolutes that one must take to become the Übermensch or the Overman, right? So when Nietzsche passed away in 1900, his sister would end up taking his writings and twisting it to the Nazi cause, which is why you saw the Nazis using the term Übermensch all the time because they believe themselves to be the Overmen, when in reality, they were still tying themselves to moral absolutes, right? Like, oh, they were the supreme beings. They were better than everyone. Blah blah blah. Uh, no, so the Nazis were not Übermensch, as Nietzsche would define them. They unfortunately took his words and bastardized them, which is why Nietzsche is such a controversial figure today, even though it was all his sister's doing.
All I have to say is nerd.
Yeah, dude, I'm a history guy. What do you expect?
That.
And then he has one more idea of eternal recurrence. This is a thought experiment that asks individuals to imagine that their life, with all its events and decisions, would repeat endlessly. This concept challenges people to live in a way that they would embrace this eternal repetition, encouraging a life of purpose, affirmation, and self creation. I don't know. I don't know about that because I feel like if things were to play out the exact same every single time, and I wouldn't know it, that's different. But if I am cognizant of my life repeating endlessly, then there might be some things that I want to change. So I guess that's the I guess my question would be, okay, am I allowed to change anything in this thought experiment, or
I would assume.
confined to am I confined to living the exact same life over and over again?
I think it's you're confined. Based on that, because like the way it's being said, seems like it's like you have to live the way you want to live now, because then you can't change it. You know, once you're done the first time, you're done, and that's it. Committed.
Right. But I mean, but I guess also like, but if it is the same, it would go against the purpose of the thought experiment, which is to encourage a life of purpose, affirmation, and self-creation, right? And so I feel
Yeah,
like if you were to be able to go back and change things, you could make a new purpose for yourself. You can, or you can affirm your decisions, or find a completely new path.
I think the whole point of the like, self-creation stuff like that is in the present instead of, at the very end or, later. I think the whole point is like live the life that you want to live now, make the changes you want to make now so that you don't, have in that repetition, that theoretical repetition, it's not like a massive nightmare or something. You can actually
Okay,
like
yeah,
it.
I can see that. I can see that because I know there's some interpretations of of some people's interpretations of what hell would be like in the Christian theology. Is like it's like repeating like the worst moments of your life over and over again. So it's like, okay, make a reflection of that. So I can see that. So moving on to Jean Paul Sartre. I believe that's the correct pronunciation for the Frenchies. So Jean Paul Sartre was a leading figure in existentialism, which was a philosophy that emphasized individual freedom, choice, and responsibility. Sartre's existentialism is concerned with the human condition in a world without inherent meaning, where individuals must create meaning through their actions. So this is going to be a little interesting, I think. So Sartre's famous statement, "Existence precedes essence," captures the core of existentialism. Unlike objects or beings with predetermined purposes, like a knife which is designed to cut, oh, excuse me, human beings first exist and then must define their own essence through their choices and actions. In a world without predefined meaning, individuals are condemned to be free and must take responsibility for the creation of their own values and purpose. So I think this is something unique to humans, like I think they said, right? So Sartre said that this is unique to humans. Um, but I feel like this is like in a vacuum, right? If you are in a vacuum, you don't have any sort of belief system. You believe that you have to mold yourself into having a purpose, mold yourself into having skills, which is for some people's cases is true, right? Some people have interests that are outside their natural skills, right? Like some people really like art. Some people want to be artists, but don't have the natural skill of someone who's a natural artist, so they have to work towards it. But other times some people are naturally gifted at other things, like some people are naturally gifted at math. Some people are naturally gifted at absorbing a lot of information at a time, remembering it, and being able to expose it back to you in however form you want. So I think it really depends on the person. But I think as Christians, I think we believe that God gives us our gifts and that He has a plan for all of us, which I think makes it a little bit easier to say that, oh, we don't define ourselves, God defines me. But at the same time, I can understand the people that feel like they have to define themselves because they don't want to be defined by some existential being, which again I can completely understand that.
Yeah.
Yeah. You agree? All right. So freedom and responsibility. Sartre argued that human beings are radically free, and this freedom comes with an overwhelming responsibility. There are no external justifications for one's actions, and each individual must confront the anguish of making choices in a world devoid of objective values. This freedom can lead to bad faith, a form of self deception where individuals deny their freedom by blaming their actions on external forces, for example, societal norms or fate. So I think I think this is an interesting concept. The idea that we have an overwhelming responsibility over our freedom, right? Because if you think about it, societies, so like the U.S. Constitution, it's just an idea. The charter for the UN is just an idea. The only thing that gives it power is our belief in the system, right? Because if for one day we say as a group, as a country that we don't believe in the US Constitution, we don't believe in the UN Charter, then it no longer holds any power, right? And then that's where our radical freedoms come in. But um I think that at the same time, I don't think that this quote unquote bad faith, as Sartre puts it, isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? Because this goes back to Rousseau, Locke, and the whole idea of the social contract theory, right? So you have to give up some of your freedoms in order to live safely in a society, right? You can't have, as I said earlier, with Nietzsche's morality, how morals should be defined by yourself. You can't have someone running around playing Batman, playing vigilante with the law, right? You just can, because then it's okay. Well, then who's upholding the law for them? So I think that while I can understand where Sartre's coming from, right, for like the people that are very much in their faith, right, that say, "Oh, I don't drink because I believe the Bible says so. I don't do this because my faith tells me not to. Because to be a good whatever religion, I have to do this." I can kind of understand where he sees it as a limitation, but at the same time, I wouldn't condemn someone else's beliefs to say that, they're just depriving themselves of their freedom. Because if it's their freedom, then they have the choice to do with whatever they want with it. They can limit their freedom however they want. They can be expressive with their freedom as much as they want.
Yeah, I think that's the key point there is that freedom implies like, or if you have freedom, right, you can choose to be part of religion, right? You can choose that. So that's actually like a result of your free choice is to do that. It's not just like a like okay, there's some cases where somebody gets, like a cult or something, or somebody gets raised in something like that, but you still do have a choice. It might be difficult, but there's no point where you still don't. So to boil down like religion, right, as an example, like saying it restricts freedom is not really I think a good way of putting it, because choosing a religion is freedom.
Right. Right. And so he kind of further goes on to like for an example for like the bad faith argument is a waiter who over identifies with their role as a waiter, right? Acting as though they're nothing more than their job, which is in bad faith because they're ignoring their freedom to be more than that role. I mean, I feel like he's just defining someone who's a workaholic, right? That just loves doing their work and only sees themselves doing work, right? I don't see that as a bad faith thing because, like, I mean, there's plenty of people like that define themselves based on their role in society. But I don't think that's bad faith. I don't think that's bad to say, for example, define yourself as a mother, right? I don't think it's a bad thing. But at the same time, I can understand someone who's like, "Oh, you're limiting yourself by just defining yourself as a mother." I can understand that too because I feel like some people that's enough. For others, they want, like, some people want to work and raise kids. Some people want to just stay at home with the kids. Some people don't want kids, and that's completely fine. But I would say just don't let other people define you for your choices.
Yeah,
Don't let other people do that.
my my kind of like resounding like when you're first talking about it, my kind of thing is like that it's incredibly like like he's assuming that somebody isn't happy being defined as that, right? Like, and I think the mother thing is a good example. Like, people go like, if you go on like so I saw a post for some reason because my Instagram reel algorithm either goes from like young family sort of stuff to like just cartelgram. It's super weird. But I had a post and it was somebody talking about they were like born in 2006 and they already were having a kid. They were like, "Oh my gosh, what are you doing? What are you doing? You're ruining your life." Um, and it's just like, no, not necessarily, right? If that person decides to define themselves as that, and that person decides like this is what they want to do, and this is them, right? That's their identity. Then it might not be for you, but it's perfectly fine for them to feel like that. And it's like almost a self-centered way of looking at it, right? Because if you're looking at somebody's decision to identify themselves as something like based off their work or occupation or whatever attribute else it is, and you don't agree with that, and you don't understand it, well, it honestly doesn't really make a difference because that's your view as seen it as unhealthy or not the right idea.
Right. Right. So I inher I really do agree with that. And so Sartre's last major work, his work Being and Nothingness, he delves into the nature of consciousness, freedom, and human existence. He ends up distinguishing between being in itself, which is the unreflective existence of objects, and being for itself, the conscious existence of human beings. He emphasizes the nothingness that defines human consciousness and its ability to transcend the present through choices. That's a mouthful.
Yeah.
Um, so from what I get from this is that this goes back to the whole thing where humans have to define themselves. So I think that he's arguing that when you're born, right, your human consciousness, there's nothing there, right? Like there's very few people. I don't think there's many people, if any, that can remember their birth, right? You don't remember coming out your mother's womb. You don't remember crying on the operating table when they cut the umbilical cord, all that stuff. You don't remember that. You usually kind of get that starting around like I think age 3. I think like at the oldest. I think is when you can start remembering. Um, at the oldest, like when you could start. Um, but I don't think it's that right because think about this. Like when a woman is pregnant, the baby can hear at a certain point. The baby can hear. The baby can. Uh, I mean that's the thing. It can react to external stimuli, right? And so it's like that's why people recommend playing music, right, and having like those headphone things that they put on the belly, and they play music for the baby, right? You think like, what do you mean? Like the baby can't hear? No, the baby can hear, right? And that kind of stuff can transfer over to them in their development, right? Like they can recognize voices. They can do this all at a young age, right? And at an age where you don't think they can remember or they can't react, they can.
Yeah.
So I would say that there's not nothingness. There is think of it like it's factory settings, right? Like when you were born, you are a factory settings human. Like you are at your most basic, your most it's factory settings, right?
Default.
Because all you can do is literally your default settings. You know that man, I'm hungry. Wah, mom, give me food. Like you know your body tells you what it needs. When you get older and you have more experiences, you can you can word that out better, right? Like when you get older and you realize, man, Chinese food is great. You go home from school and you go, Mom, can we get Chinese food? Right? And so I think saying that there's there's a nothingness that defines human consciousness, I think is just completely out of the picture because of what we know now.
Yeah. And I think that also you could boil that like down to a biological level too. your brain is always doing. It's not just like nothing. Like when I hear nothingness defines like human consciousness, like absolutely nothing, like nothing, nothing. Like, it's not really true. That's
Right.
what
Nothingness would argue that'd be an argument for brain dead,
essentially, yeah.
brain death. Because even people that are in comas that aren't um that aren't cognizant of what's going on around them, they can still hear. They can still
Yeah,
like their brain will react, right? Because it's like, oh, I'm getting these signals from the ears. I'm
it,
getting the audio signals.
it depends on the coma, but yeah,
It does depend on the
generally,
coma, but yeah.
it also like, well, I forgot what I was gonna say, but yeah, it depends on the coma because there's some times where you can have like lack of brain, but
Right. Right. All right. So that is Sartre. So his existentialism would shape the mid 20th century philosophy and literature, and he would influence figures like Simone de Beauvoir and Albert Camus. His ideas on freedom, responsibility, and the human condition remain central in existentialist thought today. All right, so the last of our major philosophers on this list is Ludwig Wittgenstein. Lived from 1889 to 1951. He was one of the most influential philosophers of the 20th century, known for his work in the philosophy of language and the nature of meaning. Wittgenstein's philosophy is typically divided into two phases. Excuse me. His early work in Tractatus Logico Philosophicus and his later work in philosophical investigations. So, from what I'm getting at, for the first part sounds like his try hard phase, right? He's really trying to get a name for himself, and then uh, philosophical investigations is like he's in his retirement, and he's like, oh, I kind of want to stay relevant. Here's this, right? Because he goes from naming his writing or his theory in like this Latin Greek uh, text to philosophical investigations. So this is gonna be interesting. Let's dive in. So in his early work, Tractatus Logico Philosophicus, Wittgenstein sought to identify the relationship between language and reality. He argued that language is but a picture of reality, and that the structure of language reflects the structure of the world. He has a famous quote about this. It goes, "The limits of my language mean the limits of my world." Suggests that our understanding of the world is constrained by the language that we use. He would develop the picture theory of language. Uh, Wittgenstein's picture theory held that statements are meaningful if they can be pictured or mapped onto states of affairs in the world. So, according to his view, language functions by creating mental images that correspond to real world objects or events. Jesus, sorry, I can't stop coughing. So this is a little interesting, I guess, because it depends on how your mind works, right? Some people, their minds work like that, right? Like they can generate pictures in their minds, right? Like I can picture a fluffy cloud in the sky, and I can tell you everything about it. It's the sky background is blue. The the cloud is white with hints of gray indicating shadows, and it's a fluffy cloud, right? Other people cannot. They just like they hear the word, like say they hear they hear think in their mind, they just picture the word think like a sentence, right? And so I do think it's based on, how how your mind works, but also I definitely do agree with his argument that language is the limits of reality, limits of the world, because we only have words um to describe how we see the world right now, right? And as we keep evolving and our understanding of the world and the universe is evolving, we have new words to describe that.
yeah.
It wouldn't make sense to have an idea, have a word to come up with words for things that we don't know about, right? Like even the philosophers, like they had their theories going, and they had to come up with words for it, but later down the line, we would end up proving those things correct. So it's very much like this fine line of you can only have language to describe the world as is, but there's wiggle room to describe what isn't there or what may be there. Right? Because like first you had the theory of atoms. As we figured out atoms exist, we're like, okay, but what about something smaller than atoms? What about subatomic particles?
Yeah.
And so we combined words, prefixes, and all that to make a new word to describe something that we didn't know yet existed that we would end up figuring out existed.
Yeah, I think that definitely is really what one of the largest things that influences language, but I also think it can also be kind of flipped, where um, that words also get, I guess, removed because they're no longer, like, I guess, useful or no longer used as much, right? So, words that may have been used to describe something that doesn't really, like, because of like scientific um, discoveries, you might have something that you might have had a word before that to represent something, but now is no longer used as much.
Right. I can definitely see that. Um right. Yeah, for sure. So Wittgenstein's later works, his philosophical investigations, he moved away from the supposed rigid structure of the Tractatus and developed the idea that meaning comes from the use of language in context. So he rejected the notion of an ideal language and instead focused on ordinary language and the way words are used in specific social activities, which he called language games. Language games, as Wittgenstein argued, that words acquire meaning through their use in various contexts or games of language. For example, the word game can mean different things depending on whether one is talking about a card game, a sport, or a metaphorical game. Excuse me. Meaning is not fixed, but arises from the diverse practices within a community.
Yeah, I mean,
He, oh,
God,
sorry. Continue. No, continue.
I mean, yeah, I think right, I could say a word like I think that also, there's different languages, right? So, the game example works. It's I think it's very apparent that words mean different things based on context. Um, just yeah, I think it's kind of obvious.
Yeah.
It's like yeah, duh.
I mean, yeah, this definitely is like, dude took one etymology class, and he's like, dude, I
I
know where
oh,
words come
I
from.
got it, dude.
I
Oh,
got it,
listen to
dude.
this, bro.
Then he would also have the private language argument. He critiqued the idea of a private language or language that can only be understood by a single individual. He argued that language is inherently social and that meaning can only be established within a public framework of rules and shared understanding. Tell that to lawyers. Like, legal jargon is such a pain to understand, and it's why I'm not going to law school because I don't feel like learning that. Um, but I can understand this in a way, but I can also understand the opposite, right? Because just because a language is spoken by one person doesn't mean it wasn't spoken or understood by multiple people in the past, or it could be understood by multiple people in the future, right? For example, ancient Mayan. There are some people that speak that still today. It's very few, but they still speak it. Same thing for my people down here. Cajun French is a dying language, but there are still pockets of people that can still speak it. So when it gets down to the single individual, I'm not going to classify that as a private language. That's just a dying language.
Oh,
And then for the inverse, right? Tolkien, he came up with all the different language systems for the elves, the dwarves, the orcs, and all that. And at one point, he was the only one that could understand it. But now you have a whole population of people that are total Tolkien nerds and can read and write and understand the Elvish and Dwarven languages.
Yeah, I think that would the example the private languages is more like fitting to the life cycle, I guess, of a language, right? Like you have a
Mm.
private language, quote unquote, at the beginning and at the end. But otherwise, I don't think language is necessarily like that because you can there's a chance you can understand a language that nobody really speaks. Now, these aren't the same languages. I'm not claiming them to be the same, but Russian and Ukrainian, technically, you can kind of understand that even if you don't understand, like, know how to, like, know either one or both of them rather. They're not the same. I'm not saying they're the same, but you technically could. And if you have an example where you have two very similar languages, but one is only known by one person, you still might be able to interact with that person because of just a like, oh yeah, I understand this type of a view. Um,
Yeah, for sure. And I think that language is interesting for sure. Like the history of language is honestly phenomenal. How we go from like the Indo-European languages to all the languages that we see today in from Europe to India to the Middle East and all that is very interesting how those languages evolved. And even just looking at like the English as a language, like you just go back. I think it's just about 800 years, completely different language. Even going back 200 years, not 200, like 300, 400 years into the time of Shakespeare. And I mean, you can still probably understand it, but the structure is different. And so I think that it's a relationship between society and the human potential is what language is,
yeah,
because uh, language changes with the society that it exists in, and it changes based on the societies that coexist with the society of the language's origin.
yeah,
Yeah. All right. So to finish, Wittgenstein's work in the philosophy of language would end up influencing many fields, including analytic philosophy, philosophy of mind, and linguistics. His later work, which would emphasize the social and practical aspects of language, remains central to debates about meaning, communication, understanding. He would, yeah. So that is the last of our major philosophers in our introduction to philosophical thought series. So I hope this is really educational and interesting for y'all to listen to. After next week's debate on Marxism, we will be starting our series on the introduction to philosophical ethics. Right. So I think this one's going to be a little bit longer. Still trying to figure out if we want to do it like this style, where we're just listing and discussing different philosophers, or if we want to do it episode by episode, like we have a full episode dedicated to utilitarianism, a full
yes,
episode dedicated to each of the different types of ethics, which I
second,
think will be interesting. Allows it. It's, I think that will allow us to go more in depth and have fun little like mini discussions or mini debates in there. And then at the end, we can maybe decide. And at the end of that series, we can maybe have a vote to figure out, okay, what's our next debate going to be, and it could be on an ethics topic, and then we can get into more of the fun stuff, right? It's like actually discussing like current events and current and past events in a philosophical lens,
yeah,
but that's ethical, metaphysics, all that kind of stuff. So definitely looking forward to it. Thank y'all so much for the support that we are seeing on this first video. I think as of right now, it's 31 views in less than a week. I wasn't expecting that many, to be completely honest, and that's great. If y'all like what y'all are hearing, please like and subscribe, and please comment what y'all want us to talk about. We want to talk about we want y'all to hear what y'all want to hear, right? We don't want to just babble on about something that doesn't interest y'all, because y'all are as part of this podcast as me and Marshall are. So please comment what y'all want us to talk about, and we can put it in like a whole like one of those like the spinning circle things that
Yes.
that I know it's stupid, the
To-
spinning circle thing, but you know what I'm talking about.
like twice a month we play like Wheel of Topics.
Yeah, exactly. Wheel of topics. We can have the wheel of philosophical topics, and that can choose anything from our next debate to the next topic that we go in depth about.
Like ethics
All
of
right.
furry art or something stupid like that. Given the internet,
Did,
but
did you say ethics furry art?
yeah, dude, there's gonna be somebody. I know who in our comment section would say something stupid like that. You
Anyways.
know I'm right. Stop booing me.
All right. Just leave you with a few parting words. Scientia potentia est. Knowledge is power. Y'all have a good one. Bruh, fucking for real. Ethics furry art? Oh my god. Please tell me you stopped recording. Subby. Subby. Bro. Are you muted or some shit? The fuck? Dude.
1 second.
I was like, please make sure you did you cut? The fuck? We were done.
I know, but like after show.
Oh my god. The fuck?
Alright, oh well.